Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a set that has been growing in popularity lately. This one is the ZiiGaat Odyssey. So it was released a little while ago, and I had reviewed the Arcadia. And after hearing the Arcadia, I was kind of looking around saying, well, if Odyssey is better than Arcadia, I definitely want to hear Odyssey. So that is how I ended up with Odyssey. So kind of glad I did. I'm glad I kind of asked for it, and luckily Linsoul actually sent it to me. So that doesn't happen all that often. So very much grateful for them to give me the opportunity to hear a set that people have been continually to talk about. And we'll talk about that little phenomenon in a second. But not going to spend a ton of time looking at this one. This is, I guess, the pink and silver version of it. I don't know what the other color scheme is, but that's what it looks like. You do get the ZiiGaat case. It does come with the accessories that you're probably used to seeing. 2 pairs of tips. Well, I think one pair is foam, the other one of those, and that is the standard ZiiGaat cable, which I did not use, but it is the one that they've been using on a few of their sets. So let's kind of dive into it. And what is this one? Of course, it is a single dynamic driver, 3 balanced armatures. They happen to be Knowles balanced armatures. It costs about $200. So what is it? And I'll call this one a slow burn or a long tail. And that's kind of exactly what I was referring to earlier, and saying that this is a set that has actually grown with popularity after its release. And not many sets do that. Most sets, you get this initial hype period, and it's very popular for about a week, and then you never hear about it again. And with Odyssey, it's kind of a slower burn, where it does get some initial reviews, and people like the initial reviews, but what actually increases the popularity is people buying it and sharing their impressions on it. And it's just a long, slower process of it gains popularity over time, as opposed to the ones that trail off really quickly. And I call them the slow burn of the long tail, the ones that have longevity, I mean. And those are kind of special sets, and I think Odyssey is one. I think Cadenza 4 is also another one that, was kind of interesting right up front, and people kind of noticed it right up front, but it actually gained popularity over time, and Odyssey is definitely along those lines. And I'll say it's a very general appealing hybrid set, and it hits Goldilocks levels and balance to cover most genres, right? It just feels very familiar, very comforting to listen to. There's no real peakiness to it. There's no fatigue to it. It just sounds very, very nice, very general appealing. They pick levels which are going to appealing to a very wide variety of listening types. And again, that's sort of why it may not get the super technical award, but as far as sounding natural and general appealing and great on whatever library you're listening to, it actually hits that mark very well. And that's sort of why it's going to continue to be popular as time goes on. So I will talk about something about impedance on this one. It is a hybrid. It will be affected by the impedance of your source. And I'll say it doesn't take much impedance to increase the sub bass and turn it into a more fun set. But I'll take the lower version of it. So one thing that sort of confused me about Odyssey, and again, this one was released a while back, and there was lots of grass floating around, and I just assumed it was a standard U-shape set, like many of the hybrids that were released in 2024. And then when I listened to it, I said, this doesn't actually sound U-shaped at all. It actually has quite a bit of mid-bass to it. It actually has a fullness to it. It has some body to it. It is probably tilted and not really U-shaped. And I sort of chalk this up to impedance. People who measure this one with slightly more impedance, it is going to look more U-shaped. So that's what you're seeing in the blue. The blue is what most people graph this one as, and they obviously have a little bit more impedance, but you get a little bit more sub-bass, and it actually dips out the mid-bass a little bit, and you end up with the classic U-shaped style looking, bass to mids. What I heard right away was this low impedance version, and it's a much better glide. It's sort of a lower sub bass with a fuller style mid bass, and that's what I heard right away. So I don't know. I didn't actually watch that many reviews or read any reviews of Odyssey, but maybe people are talking about it differently than it graphs is what I would assume. But yeah, kind of right away, I sort of said that the U-shaped graph that I had been used to seeing on Odyssey is not necessarily how it sounds. So do be aware that if you do give it a little bit of impedance, you will get a little bump here, you will get a little bit of a bump there, and you will get kind of a dip there, and it will take on that more traditional U-shape that you're used to on other hybrids. So let's talk about some sets that were kind of rank them most boring to most fun. And I'll start with the one that I kind of refer to as that the traditional slow burn, the one that was so safe that people didn't like it. It didn't get a whole lot of attention when it was released. And then as time went on, people sort of realized that the mids on Cadenza 4 were actually quite fantastic. And EPZ P50 is going to be another one, and we'll kind of see if that one ends up being a slow burn or not. But these sets tend to be a little bit safe, a little bit boring. They focus on the midsection as opposed to really big bass boosts or treble boosts. They don't have that super engagement factor, but they deliver really, really solid mids. And that's exactly how I would describe Cadenza 4. It's actually a really, really nice set to listen to, but it doesn't have the engagement factor of other sets. And that's sort of why that the initial reviews were kind of, it's safe and it's boring, it's okay. But for people who are really into mids and vocals, very much a nice set. And P50, with the microplaners, it delivers something different than what you're seeing with the other hybrids that were delivered in 2024. You are getting microplaners at a very attractive price, and I think the midsection on P50 is actually quite different, a little bit unique for right now, and I think either that set will continue to have some longevity, or someone will come along and do something similar. Like I said, if you take that recipe of one dynamic driver, a couple balanced armatures, and microplaners, and deliver a tuning that is closer to Odyssey, you're going to have a new slow burn set, the one that has a lot of the characteristics of Odyssey, but a better upper treble extension, and that is going to be a stunning set if ZiiGaat decides to go that route. So sort of in the middle, I think you have the Zenz T Pro, kind of this smoother, warmer, not necessarily fun, but it was just smoother and warmer, and some people like the bass shelf on that, and maybe that is a little bit more fun. And I think Arcadia was along the lines of that too, another kind of smooth and warm set. And Odyssey, I would say, is sort of the refinement of both of these in that it is still smoother and warmer, but they amped up the upper end a little bit. So it still has this heavier low end, but a more engaging upper end, right? So it has better balance, and it's the Goldilocks levels and balance that differentiate Odyssey from these sets. And those of you who are used to Zenz and like that smoother, warmer, kind of more relaxed version, you'll dig that. Arcadia was kind of a little bit more, maybe a little bit amped up, and Odyssey is just a little bit better in the balance and more of a balance between the lower end and the upper end, and a nice general appealing style, exactly what I talked about up there. That's where Odyssey kind of fits in there. And then at the very fun level, you've kind of got sets like Estrella, Da Vinci, Dyna Quattro. There was lots of U-shaped gang sets. Those were very fun for certain listener types. They tried to be different, like these Estrella and Da Vinci and Dyna Quattro tried to be different, give you a heavier, bassier sound. Some of them tried to be the same, 200 hertz flat bottom, U-shaped, like I just showed you with Odyssey on Impedance. It has that, once you hit the floor, 200 cut straight across, and it looks like a giant U-shape. There was lots and lots of sets that tried to do that as well. So lots of sets that tried to be different, lots of sets that tried to be the same and take advantage of what was popular at the time. So, yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily boring to fun, but that's sort of a talk of where Odyssey sort of fits in the middle. It isn't really trying to be different, but is trying to be kind of in between the people who would find these sets a little bit too lean, a little bit too safe, and the sets that were a little bit too much. Odyssey is sort of the Goldilocks, right? It's the one that is just right in the middle. So the bass, again, I would say it's not your typical sub-bass heavy, no impact, U-shape, like I said. When I first listened to it, I sort of realized it kind of right away. It's not really a U-shaped set in the traditional 2024 U-shaped hybrid style. A bit less sub-bass, a bit more mid-bass than your typical set from 2024, and it gives Odyssey more physicality to it, maybe more like Hype 2. They call it a custom dynamic driver, and there is something different about the dynamic driver. It does have a little bit more impact, a little bit more tactility to it, a little bit more physicality to it, and I would say that it reminded me kind of right away of Hype 2, and that dynamic driver had the same kind of physicality to it, and that set Hype 2 apart from, again, a lot of the other sets that came out in 2024. They picked the right dynamic driver. They said they actually developed a dynamic driver. It's a lot of fun. And definitely more impedance will raise the sub bass, and it will give you mids. Kind of how my first impression was this set on tubes, right? It's the part between the bass and the treble, and that kind of there was something about the mids where I if you go back to sets like Cadenza P50, I had listened to Mystic A right before this, very mid, not necessarily mid forward, but very revealed mids, kind of a more mid-centric tuning. This one takes on a more traditional hybrid style, more, and I would say it's even more U-shaped style or V-shaped style, where the mids are set back a little bit. The mids are very good, but still a hair lower than the bass and the treble. So you lose some of that transparency in the dynamics. And I will say that Mystic 8 kind of ruined it for me. And that happens a lot. I mean, like the set that you were listening to prior to popping in Odyssey, and it influences your first impression of Odyssey. And this is a great set, obviously, and people are continuing to talk about it and enjoy it. But compared to some sets that are more mid-centric, it will take on more of a V shape, where the mids are just a hair back and there's a little bit less transparency, dynamics, resolve, all those kinds of things. It definitely is general appealing. It definitely has a very natural tone to it, and that's what most people care about. That is why this continues to be the slow burn and why people continue to buy it and enjoy it. As far as the right balance and the right kind of I'll talk about it in a second. The musicality is quite high on this, but going back to what some of the other $200 hybrids did recently, those did cleaner, more transparent, leaner mids. Those microplaners, they had resolution and dynamics on top. That's a different tuning or listener preference than what you're going to get on Odyssey. And Odyssey, and downside is sort of, I don't know if downside is the right word, but this one is definitely more fun than resolving, and it doesn't really scale with amps. It skews towards timbre preference, but it doesn't lose all the dynamics like most of the sets trying to do a natural hybrid. And that's where I would say that Odyssey sets itself apart from a lot of the sets and sets like Butterfly. I think a lot of the Meyer audio sets tried to do a very natural sounding hybrid, and they tended to pull back the dynamics so far in that it lost all the dynamics and it just sounded timbre preference, right? If the only thing you care about is the flute sounding like a flute, those sets sounded okay, but their dynamic drivers and their balanced armatures didn't necessarily bring out the best techs or sound like traditional hybrids. And Odyssey is kind of the one set that actually has really, really nice balance between sounding very natural, no peaks, no offensive timbre to it, still sounding very, very natural, still sounding very, very full. But, it just does it much better than lots of other sets. And again, I think ZiiGaat tends to do almost a KZ refinement cycle. They put out so many sets in what seemed like a short period of time, but they also seem to be learning on each set and how to make each set slightly better than the previous one. And I think Odyssey is just, their Odyssey from the Syncos and, the Nuos, all those earlier prior sets that they put together that people enjoyed. But Odyssey seems to be the one that almost replaced all of the others because it is more general appealing and has better levels and got rid of some of the annoying, mini nitpicks of some of the other sets. So I do think that they actually put together a really, really nice tuning that is essentially better than what some of the other sets have tried to do, just better executed on Odyssey. And on the treble, again, it rides the fine line. It was a little bit extra, but not too much. The bass is a little boosted, so the treble is boosted a little bit, so both can be heard and balanced. Again, this is more of a musical than technical sound. I think Knowles tend to allow a little bit, pushing a little bit extra. If you're used to the bell sing and some of the cheaper balanced armatures, you really can't push those too hard because they really take on this metallic tone to it. Knowles, you can push them a little bit harder, and that's exactly what you kind of hear on Odyssey. ZiiGaat really polished off the peaks from earlier sets, boosted without the bright spots. And I'll say that's almost true. And you can actually see it on the graph. If you give it a little bit of impedance, this is a 10 ohm, and this little bit right here kind of takes off, and you will get a little bit of a bright spot on maybe your snares, and snares is mostly where I noticed it, but maybe the cymbals. Just bumping up the 5K a little bit is noticeable for people who are sensitive to 5K. So that's why I say I very much prefer the lower impedance version. I much better preferred the more natural version of the upper mids into treble and this kind of flat linear, exactly what how it sounds on low impedance, exactly what I preferred. And also, this is a fine level of sub bass, and then you get a little bit more body here. End to end, this is a very, very nicely tuned set. With impedance, sure, it's a little bit more fun. You'll get a little bit extra there. That'll appeal to some people as well. It's nice to have the option to kind of cover both of those style tunings. So I don't really have any problem with people who want to use it on impedance adapters. I just chose not to. And on the stage, I'll say all the dimensions, as you would expect on a set that has some mid-bass depth, it has some upper treble air, and it has relaxed ear gain, right? The tuning on this one is very much applicable to a nice style stage, exactly what you would expect on Odyssey, on a $200 hybrid. So they kind of nailed that as well. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.